He had an out-of-body experience more than 35 years ago, encountered his grandfather in a place that could have been perhaps heaven. And his grandfather told him, "Get back to earth, back to your life. It's not time for you here yet." This is Mike Shiloh. The program is called Impact Houston, a service of Salem Radio Houston, and it happened to Ray Burroughs on the operating table where he was being operated upon for a brain tumor. An inspiring story that Mr. Burroughs has written in a book called God Smiles for Me, Why Death Could Not Hold Me. See, after the operation, Mr. Burroughs found that half his face was paralyzed. But then again, he was told he only had a few weeks to live before the operation, and he was alive and is alive today, a gift from God. Even though he can't smile, he's still alive, and God smiles for him. Thank you for being with us, Ray.
Well, Michael, we thank you for the opportunity to be here today. God Smiles for Me is the story of my life before, after, and during an incredible spiritual experience that became the core element in my unshakable and unbreakable belief in God and the promise of eternal life. 35 years ago, at the age of 33, I had a massive tumor at the base of my brain. That was an immediate threat to my life. The doctor said I would die, and they were right. During that surgery, my heart stopped, and I had an out-of-the-body experience. Freed of my body, I made a brief trip to heaven. At some point along the way on my journey, I stopped, and my long-deceased grandfather, someone I'd loved very much as a child, told me I had to come back to earth because God still had a purpose for my life. God Smiles for Me, Why Death Could Not Hold Me, is my testimony of hope, promise, and commitment, the power of prayer, and the healing grace of God. But most of all, it's a story of love, of God, family, community in this wonderful journey called life. It's a how-to book on the joys and benefits of living a Christian life.
Well, when you say you saw your long-deceased grandfather, was that in a vision? Do you feel like you actually saw him right there in front of you?
Well, it was really amazing. You know, you hear people that have out-of-the-body experiences, and when my heart stopped, evidently, I did see things that happened in that operation that there was no way that I could know about unless I was somewhere in that room watching it, because my head was bolted to a table and I was face down. At some point, everything went dark and I started moving through what most people describe as a tunnel. Well, to me, it wasn't a tunnel, it was a valley, and it was constantly fluctuating and moving. And there was a light in the distance, and I was moving toward that light. As I moved further on, I realized that it wasn't mountains or tunnels or whatever at all, but it was people on each side reaching out to greet me. I guess it was those that had gone before. You know, at that time, the most wonderful feeling was that I knew the answers to every question known by mankind. Now the only thing I know is that I knew the answer at one time, because when you come back, you can't bring it with you. But at some point, I stopped, and a gentleman stepped out of the crowd of greeting visitors or spirits, and I recognized him as my grandfather, but he wasn't old and bent as he'd been before. When I had known him before he died, he was standing tall and straight. He was a much younger man in good health, and he called my name, and he said, "Raymond, you have to go back. God still has a purpose for your life." And to tell you the truth, Michael, I didn't want to go. That's the most wonderful place I've ever been. But he made it very clear it wasn't my choice to make.
Well, this was 1975. You had gone to the doctor for a medical exam?
I was talking on the phone one day, and I went deaf in my left ear. And I switched the phone to my right ear, and it was working again. And then I would need to make some notes, and I put it back to my left ear, and it was dead, nothing. And it was obvious the problem wasn't with the phone, it was in my head. So I went to a doctor. We live in Lake Jackson, Texas, down on the Gulf Coast. I went to a doctor just south of where we live, and he sent me over to the University of Texas Medical Center at Galveston, and they did a bunch of different tests. And it wasn't long after that I got back with him, and he told me that I had a tumor at the base of my brain, and it was entangled in my brain stem, and that I only had a few weeks to live. He predicted 4 to 6 weeks. So after that, on the day I learned of the tumor, even before I went home to tell my wife and my children what had happened, I went down to the Gulf, and I waded out up to my waist in the surf. And at first I was angry, and I put my fist up, and I said, "God, I'm going to beat this thing." And then the wave nearly knocked me down, and I went back to my car. And when I finally looked up after crying for several hours, I walked back out into that surf, and everything was nice and beautiful then. And I told God that if I would survive this thing, that we would beat this thing. And if I did, that I would tell the world. And that's what God Smiles for Me is all about. That's the name of the book.
This is the Impact Houston program on Salem Radio Houston, and we're talking with Ray Burroughs, who's the author of God Smiles For Me, Why Death Could Not Hold Me, and the book is available at Amazon.com and other locations. Did you have children at the time you had this surgery and this out-of-body experience?
I had a son who was 3 and a daughter who was 8 years old. So we were the perfect little suburban family. We'd been living in Houston. We just moved to Lake Jackson, which proved to be a very caring community that the people knew what was happening to the neighbors and helped us during that time. But probably the most difficult thing before the surgery was telling those kids goodbye, not knowing whether I'd ever see them again or not. So,
and you went into the surgery not knowing whether you'd live through it.
They had told me I had a very small chance to survive, and that if I did, I would probably have mental and physical, disabilities as a result of it. What was supposed to be a 7-hour surgery turned into a 16-hour marathon against death, a total.
16 hours.
16 hours. When I woke up from the surgery, they woke me up immediately following that because they were trying to see if I had brain damage or, before my head swelled up, and I did have temporary brain damage. And sometimes I talked about my family, sometimes I talked about other things, but the thing I talked about most was seeing the light, and that was about that out-of-the-body experience. And, of course, none of them understood it at the time. After that, I spent several months just struggling to stay alive and learn how to walk again, how to talk, all the things that we normally take for granted.
But you had to learn all over again.
I had to learn all over. But God was with us, and so was my wife, Pat, and she became God's angel taking care of me. And she's the love of my life, my partner, and my best friend. And other than God's input and his other earthly angels, Pat was the main reason that I'm here talking to you today.
Now, why is the book called God Smiles For Me?
Well, Michael, during that 16-hour experimental surgery, my heart stopped 3 times, like I mentioned before. But in order to fully remove the tumor, the doctors had to cut the nerve that controlled the left side of my face. One of the consequences of doing so was that I lost the ability to smile. It took a while, but once I got over the shock of losing my physical identity, and that probably was one of the most stressful things in this whole venture, I realized that if I would be grateful for being alive and live a God-filled life, I didn't have to smile. God would smile for me. So God Smiles For Me is the title of the book, and it's also the concluding statement in the book. And if anyone else who lives a God-filled life, I think God will smile for them too.
From that point on, you decided not to necessarily talk about it all the time.
Well, I didn't feel like that I was prepared to talk about it. I'm a bard by nature. I'd already written some things, and I love to write. And
you're an architect.
And I'm an architect, so I'm a creative person. And, of course, for novels and myths and legend, exaggeration is what makes them great. The story wanted to grow. And I really wasn't confident enough in my ability to communicate what I'd seen and done and experienced to the public, at least, what it was about. So I prayed a long time before I made a decision to go ahead and share that with everyone. I did publish a story in 1984 that was published by the Presbyterian Journal that went around the world. And we knew we had a powerful story that attracted a lot of people, but I didn't mention the out-of-the-body experience at that time for the reasons I just told you.
The story was about the operation?
It was about the whole process. See, God Smiles For Me is not just about the out-of-the-body experience, although the chapter called The Journey is probably the most important part of the book as far as I'm concerned, because that's the message I promised to tell. But it's a book on what happened before, and then, of course, the journey was during, and what happened after. There's many miracles. So many things were already in place before we ever learned of this. It was obvious that God had a plan to give me a second chance at life. And because he did so, I've had a chance to try to live a better Christian life.
Well, you mentioned a moment ago that there appears to have been a lot coming together as far as miracles go. Can you tell us a little bit about some of the miracles that have occurred both before and after this operation back in 1975?
Well, I certainly can. Of course, the first one was discovering the tumor by accident like we did, because there was no feeling, there was no pain, there was nothing. Had one of the other nerves gone out first, I would have died, but it turned out that the acoustic nerve was what went out first, and so we discovered the tumor. So that was a miracle. When we realized we were in really trouble, we turned to a friend in Houston who was a very major player in the medical center, who had advised us he had just received a new medical instrument that hadn't even been tested yet. And would we come up and let him test this new CAT scan? I'd never heard the word before.
Yeah, this new thing called the CAT scan.
It was before. Yeah. It was before it had even been announced publicly that it was available. And by doing that mapping, he discovered that the tumor truly was tangled in my brainstem, and it was really a challenge to do this. With that information, we couldn't find anybody to operate on me. Nobody would do it. They said, go home and write your will, and that's just what we did. But soon after that, our friend found a doctor in Pasadena, California, who operated on terminal patients as an experimental basis. And he said he was willing to take a chance after a while, because we called him on the phone and we talked to him, and then found out that he wouldn't be available for 6 months. And I only had 6 weeks to live. About a week later, he calls back and he says, Raymond, 3 years ago, I ordered some instruments from abroad, I believe it's Holland or somewhere, some electron microscopes that would allow me to do more intricate surgery than I've ever done before. And I'd like to try them out. So within a matter of weeks, from the time of discovering this doctor, we were on our way to California. And I truly believe he's the only doctor in the world that could have saved my life.
And we have to remember this was 1975 when this operation occurred. A lot of things have happened since then, a lot of medical breakthroughs. We're talking here on Impact Houston with Ray Burroughs. He's the author of God Smiles for Me, Why Death Could Not Hold Me. And it's about his operating room near-death experience and the subsequent recovery over 35 years from the successful operation for brain cancer back in 75. A lot of miracles, right, Ray?
So it's just been many, many things like that. There's a chapter in the book called The House That God Built. One of the results of this surgery was I was so crippled up that I immediately lost my job. I couldn't be the front man and the promotional person that I was with the development firm I was working with anymore. We just had to start over from scratch,
You and your family?
Me and my family.
Yeah.
So we didn't have anything to work with, but through some miracle, we were able to build our dream house. And we did it within 3 years of the time that I had this surgery. At a time when I had an income of less than $15,000, which was 1/10 of what I had been making before this happened, the savings and loan decided to lend me the money to build a house. A lot became available in the subdivision where we had originally planned to build our dream home. And I went into the bankers and I said, I'd like to buy one of those lots. And so they said, no, we just sell them to builders. I said, well, I really need to buy a lot. They said, well, it wouldn't be fair to the other builders because, they sell them in lots of 6 or 12 or something. So they called me out right before the lots were to go on sale and said, Raymond, if you'll come in here, 30 minutes before they go on sale, we'll let you have your first choice of lot. So I went in there, and there's a guy called the chairman in the book, and I said, I'd like to buy that lot. And he knew because I already told him. And it was the most expensive lot in this subdivision and the most premier subdivision in our community at that time. And he says, how are you going to pay for it? I said, well, I don't have any money. He said, well, how can we sell you a lot if you don't have any money? And I said, well, don't y'all hold a lot on the deposit sometimes for a builder? And they said, well, yeah. What does it take to hold one as a down payment? And he said, about $500. Have you got $500? I said, no, I don't have $500. And so I said, well, don't you give a discount to builders when they buy lots? They said, yeah, $500. I said, well, let that be my down payment for the for the lot. And he gave me the lot. And with that, I was able to go that savings and loan and get the loan for the house. And then we talked to all the vendors in the community, and they all worked with us. Did a 30-day net. They let us have a 90-day net. And before we were through with the house, we ran out of money. We ran out of everything. And the whole community came in and helped build it. It was a barn raising.
Oh.
I mean, it was just incredible, and we had this very nice place to raise our family, and we needed it because there was some real stress on everybody at that time.
I know there was. By that point, you had gotten back to work.
Yeah, I started out on my kitchen table because I could only work the pain was so bad from the residual of the surgery that I could work about 30 minutes an hour, and then I'd pass out from the pain. Mm-hmm. I could stay awake that long. And then I'd go to sleep, and the pain would be so bad on the back of my head and my neck that I'd wake up within an hour, and then I could work again for an hour, and then it just went on and on and on. But one of the super miracles that happened was I was going blind in my left eye because the tears wouldn't flow. When you lost that nerve that controlled the left side of my face, my eye wouldn't close. They had to sew it too, and I had to wear a patch, and we had to put drops in it on an hourly basis, 24 hours a day, for several weeks. And you can imagine what that does to you, just constant something. And the doctor said he'd like to try another experimental surgery. So he took a nerve out of my tongue, hooked it to the stub of the nerve that controlled my face. And by that, instead of being totally collapsed like I was in my face, it toned my face up. And it also caused the tears to flow in my eye again and saved my eye and allowed me to close my eye. Anytime something touches the end of my tongue, my eye will close. And, of course, I've winked at just about everybody in Texas. And sometimes that'd be good and sometimes that'd be bad, but I'm sure glad to have that eye because nobody wants a one-eyed architect.
What made you decide after all these years to write this book called God Smiles for Me?
Well, I think, as I mentioned earlier, on the day I learned of the tumor, I promised God I would tell the story to the world. And even though I didn't write the book, I did start doing that within a few years of the time I had the surgery, speaking first at Rotaries and then at different prison ministries and speaking to students and counseling graduating high school students getting ready to go off to college, and just generally helping anyone that needed faith and hope and courage, because that's what this book is about. And it's not about me anymore, it's God's story, but it's a story of a typical family who is up against impossible odds. And because of their faith in God, and because of the prayer that went up from so many thousands of people that we didn't even know, and because of all the loving support we had, we were able to survive this crisis and make it a good life afterwards, and a God-filled life. To tell you the truth, Raymond Burroughs died on that operating table, but a better man took his place, because I don't think many of the things that I've accomplished could possibly have happened in the direction I was going, because I thought it was me. I'd walk down the street, and I was so proud of myself. I thought, except for the grace of God, there went God.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And
then God got my attention, and or the tumor. I don't think he gave me the tumor, but I think he gave me the means to turn the event of the tumor to a positive thing, which allowed me to be a better person.
And so there was a point here just a few years ago when you said, okay, I'm going to put this in a book?
Yes. After I'd been gone so long, I finally realized that I needed to go ahead and tell the full story of what had happened to me.
After you'd gone on so long?
Yeah, after I'd gone on so long. And people were continually responding to that article. And it went around the world. And within this is 84, in the last few years, we've had calls about that article. So we knew we had something that meant something to people. And we talked in a number of churches, and the response was very positive. One thing led to another, and somebody finally said, well, you need to put this in a book form. And I realized that was really the only way that I could reach a lot of people, because you can just do so much by yourself. Mm-hmm. Also, I had that promise to God. And one night, God just tapped me on the head and said, it's time. And I started writing. It took 4 years to write the book, and it took another year to reduce it to half the size it originally was and get the me out of it and God's miracles and God's blessings into it. The challenge in writing a memoir that is so personal is that to get to the good, you have to relive the bad. So people tell me they shed quite a few tears reading portions of this book, and I assure you I did too while I was writing it, because I had to go right back to that experience again. And
that's not easy, I know. But then again, the outcome has been so positive. And you're doing speeches, you're traveling, and you're also doing interviews on the radio. And
yeah, it's been a wonderful experience. People like yourself are extremely important to a person like me, in the opportunity to spread the word about something like this. There's 400,000 books, they say, a year published. And so what are the odds that your book will come to the attention of the book buying public? This is not a business for me, it's a mission. And so I've got plenty of time to do it. And so I'm just going to hang in there and keep doing it. I'm running toward God faster than I ever have before. It's just unbelievable, the miracles that are opened up as a result of this book. People need hope. They need faith. They need promise. They need God's help. And people tell me, well, we read that book and we see that young family could handle it, then I can handle this. I've had letters from 101-year-old ladies that said, I've been sitting around this nursing home for 10 years doing nothing, and now I've read the book, and I'm going to get up and I'm going to go testify to people. And I called the nursing home and said, what's happening? He said, she keeps making us get her up about almost every morning, get her dressed, and she take her to somebody's room, and she starts preaching. Isn't that wonderful? That's what it's all about. And then people write me and they say, I send it out to everybody that's on my email list on information about this book. People buy one book. We had one gentleman came down and he bought one for every judge in our county. And I'm talking about it at every level. It's just unbelievable.
In Brazoria County?
In Brazoria County. So it's when God takes over, you're going to win. That's all there is to it. And so I've just given it up to him, and I'm doing what I can to spread the word. And writing this book was a healing experience. And it allowed me to really look back and really see the miracles that have happened in my life. Because I never expected that at this stage of my life I'd just be beginning. It reconfirmed my belief in the hereafter. It's all been a blessing. God had a plan from day one.
Ray, We're speaking with Ray Burroughs, who's the author of God Smiles for Me, Why Death Could Not Hold Me, and this is the Impact Houston radio program. I'm Mike Shiloh, and thank you for being with us. Now, continuing with our discussion with Ray about his near-death experience and 35 years of recuperating from brain surgery for cancer back in 1975. I know that our listeners will want me to ask you this. What was it like at that moment? In other words, when they put you under for the operation back in 1975, what was it like to have that moment where you felt like you were in heaven or at least approaching something and then seeing your grandfather?
Well, Michael, I will tell you right now that that's the most wonderful experience I've ever had in my life.
You got a feeling inside
I look forward to going back there. I felt like I was becoming one with the light. One of the experiences as I was moving along through on that journey was that I noticed my body was becoming translucent and bright, and I could actually, it looked like I could see through my hand, but my body was still there. And that's when I realized I was becoming one with the light. I was becoming one of that universal, part of that universal power, this God that we know and we love and that we don't understand. You know, we can't fathom what it's all about. But I realized that there is a plan, there is a power, and it's much bigger than us, and that life is eternal. This life is just a temporary thing. And I also realized that it's not necessarily about this interpretation of the Bible or that interpretation of the Bible. It's about holiness and about God and about the power of prayer and about all these things that are so wonderful. There was a wonderful sound, and I don't know if you'd call it music. I call it the voices of the millennium, because there was a moment there when I felt like I just was part of the universe, and I knew everything, every answer ever asked by mankind. And of course, I don't remember anything now, but that I experienced that. But it was the most comforting. The spirits were just reaching out saying, come on, come on, come on, come join us. This is wonderful. And it was wonderful.
Well, there are those who have been through similar experiences who say that from that moment on, coming back to the earth, you have this picture, this big picture, that your life will never be the same again. You see the briefness of our visit to this earth and the beauty that God has put here.
It definitely changed my whole perspective of life and eternity. I realized that whatever we do now is just a part in preparing us to go to the next step. And, you know, different people believe different things, but I don't believe we're going to sit around in angels' wings and halos and sit on a cloud when we go to heaven. I think God's going to have a plan for us there, too, and we're going to be doing something at a different level. And you can interpret it 100 ways, but the truth is that there is a universal unity to all things that God created, and we're part of it. And because of that, we're part of God when we're here. We're going to be more part of God when we're there, I believe. And I think that we're just going to get a chance to just go forward and do more and more good things. And we haven't seen anything yet. We love a sunrise, but can you imagine a sunrise from heaven? It must be something. All of us, we're God's children. And just as we're different, we're all the same. We all need hope. We all need promise. We all need to make commitments. And we all need the power of prayer and the healing grace of God. And it doesn't matter what your problem is. My tumor was not malignant. My tumor was threatening to cut off the nerves that control my life. But whatever your problem is, God's grace is the same. You need only ask, and he will come into your life. Ask for him to fill you with the Holy Spirit, and he will fill you with the Holy Spirit. And you will experience a joy that you've never seen before. So right now, today is a time to make a decision to bring God into your life. Now is the time to make that commitment to lead a God-filled life. And as God smiles for me, he'll smile for you too if you do just that. So God bless, and thank you so much, Michael.
Well, thank you, Ray. It's a fascinating book, A Glimpse of Heaven, God with a Purpose for Your Life, the ultimate gift, heaven and the promise of eternal life, all of it as part of this book. It's called God Smiles for Me, Why Death Could Not Hold Me, and it's available at Amazon.com and Barnes & Noble, and you can find it also on Ray's website. Ray's website is GodSmilesNetwork.org. Again, on the web, it's www.godsmilesnetwork.org. And Amazon.com, you can find it as well. And Christian bookstores, Christian websites as well, in addition to Barnes & Noble. And to you listening, thank you very much for listening, for being with us today on the Impact Houston program. I'm Mike Shiloh, and this is Impact Houston, a service of Salem Radio Houston. And